I'm Marlene Bishop, 76 years old, and I've lived in the same house on Elm Street for nearly half a century this morning. Like every other, I was up by 5, the kettle whistling, before the sun broke over the pecan tree. Out back, Harry and I planted that tree when he got his big promotion at the paper mill. Said it'd be nice for shade in the summers. Now it stretches clear across the yard, casting shadows over what used to be Bryce's sandbox. The same yard where my grandson learned to ride a bike, where my son Hayden scraped his knees a dozen times before getting it right. Funny how quiet it gets when you're the only one left remembering things before I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been made to feel small in the home you built with your own hands. I was raised on the edge of Baton Rouge, the youngest of 5 girls in a house where nothing went to waste. Daddy worked the railway. Mama taught piano from our parlor. Every Sunday, we'd sit 6 to a pew with ironed shirts and spit-shined shoes. We were taught to say, please, thank you, and you first. Even when it hurt, I met Harry in the teacher's lounge, back when I was a fresh hire with a drawer full of lesson plans, and he was repairing the old boiler. He said, my handwriting looked like a school book, and that made me blush. He brought me roses wrapped in paper towels, and by Christmas, he'd proposed we moved into the Elm Street house in '74. The hardwood floors creaked under our dance steps on Friday nights, and we dreamed about filling it with kids, but we only had one. Hayden. The doctor said that would be it, and I accepted it. Poured everything I had into raising him, right? Taught him about kindness, about holding the door for others, and meaning what you say. He was sweet as a boy, always asking questions, always quick to hug. He met Laurel in college, brought her home one Thanksgiving and said, this is the girl I'm going to marry? I smiled, but something in her handshake was too firm, her smile too practiced. They moved in a year after Harry passed. Hayden said it would be temporary, just until they saved up for a down payment on a house of their own. I said, yes, of course I did. Who says no to their only son a year turned into 5? They had 2 children, Bryce and Penny, and room by room, the house changed. The guest room became theirs. Harry's old study turned into a nursery. My sewing nook on the first floor became my new bedroom. I folded what was left of my world into a closet and a single dresser. The rest was boxed up and pushed into the basement or vanished altogether. Laurel rearranged the furniture last month, brought in a cream leather couch, called the old one drab, said it didn't reflect their lifestyle. She never once asked me. She never once called me Mom. Only Marlene, like I was some neighbor who overstayed her welcome. Hayden barely looks up from his phone when he walks by me now, and when I make dinner, my mother's old chicken casserole. He pokes at it and asks if it's too heavy for the diet. Laurel adds, we've already ordered salads and flashes that smile the kind with no warmth in it. I miss the way Penny curls up beside me when I tell her stories about her grandfather. She loves hearing about how he used to carry me across puddles, or how he built her dad a treehouse one summer. But even that's frowned upon now, Laurel says. I'm filling her head with old-fashioned ideas. Says girls need to learn independence, not fairy tales. Last Tuesday, Hayden came home grinning. He said they were taking a trip, a grand European tour. Rome, Florence, Venice, Paris. And then he said something I never expected. And you're coming too. Mom, I couldn't speak right away. Just nodded, while Laurel added families should stay together. I wanted to believe it meant something that they wanted me with them. That maybe this would be the trip that brought us back together. I started looking at maps in the old atlas Harry kept under the bookcase, traced my fingers over Venice and Paris, and thought maybe I'd get to see those places for real. I didn't know it yet, but the trip that was supposed to bring us closer would be the one to break everything wide open. The flight to Rome lasted nearly 12 hours. The plane was packed, the seats narrow, and the air dry as paper. I sat near the back next to Penny, who fell asleep after dinner with her head on my arm. My legs ached, my ankles swollen tight against the straps of my shoes. I hadn't flown this far in my life. Hayden and Laurel seemed relaxed chatting across the aisle, and scrolling through photos on their phones. When we finally touched down in Italy, the morning sun was bright and sharp through the windows. Fiumicino Airport was a blur of noise languages I couldn't place and people rushing in every direction. Hayden moved quickly through the terminal, one hand gripping pennies, the other steering a rolling suitcase. Laurel followed with Bryce, who was already absorbed in a game on his new tablet. I trailed behind, trying to keep up. My suitcase snagged on a floor grate, and I had to stop to tug it loose. Hayden glanced back just once. "Mom, we're going to miss the shuttle," he said without slowing down. I nodded, though he wasn't looking, and hurried to catch up. My heart was thudding in my ears by the time we reached the curb. Our hotel sat just off a narrow street near Piazza Navona. It was the kind of building that looked older than anything back home, with carved stone and creaky iron balconies. The lobby was small, the floors worn smooth with years of foot traffic. The man behind the front desk smiled and spoke English with a soft Italian accent. Hayden handled the check-in, while Laurel looked around the lobby unimpressed. "We have 3 rooms," Hayden said. "One for us, one for the kids, and one for my mother." The receptionist typed something on his computer, then asked who would prefer the rooms facing the square. Hayden didn't hesitate. "My wife and I and the kids. My mother can take the one facing the courtyard." He didn't ask me, didn't even glance my way. I didn't say anything, just followed as he handed me a key and pointed toward a narrow hallway. My room was at the very end, tucked behind a corner. Inside was a narrow bed, a chipped wooden chair, and a window that opened onto a wall. The bathroom was cramped and cold, the water barely warm. I unpacked, slowly folded the dresses Laurel had picked for me into a small closet and sat down on the edge of the bed. I told myself I was lucky to be here, that I shouldn't complain, that seeing Europe at all was more than I ever expected. A knock came at the door just as I was drifting off. Bryce's voice called through the wood. "Grandma, are you ready? Daddy says we're late." I opened the door to find both kids dressed and bouncing on their heels. Hayden stood behind them, arms folded. "We've been waiting," he said. "The guide is downstairs." "I must have fallen asleep," I said. "Give me 5 minutes. Just hurry, Mom. We're already behind." They left me to get ready. I brushed my hair, slipped into one of the dresses Laurel had chosen, and joined them in the lobby. Our guide, a woman named Julia, smiled and welcomed me in Italian before switching smoothly to English. "Rome has stood for 2,000 years, she said, "so there's no rush. We'll see what we see." We stepped outside into the heat. The cobblestone streets shimmered in the sun. Julia led us through narrow alleys and wide piazzas, pointing out statues, fountains, and painted ceilings. Her voice was full of affection for every detail. I tried to keep up, but the children grew restless. "I'm hot," Penny whined. "I'm thirsty," Bryce added. "Can I play on my tablet?" Laurel sighed and turned to me. "Edith, why don't you take the kids to a cafe? Hayden and I want to finish the tour." Before I could answer, she was already turning away. I took the children's hands and led them to a nearby pizzeria. They perked up at the sight of sodas and pizza slices. I watched them eat, trying not to feel the disappointment settle in. Later at the Vatican, the same thing happened again. We stood in the Sistine Chapel, the crowd pressing close. Bryce looked up once, then groaned. "I want to go back," he whispered. "Bryce, look at the ceiling," I said gently. "That's Michelangelo's work. See how the figures reach for each other." "Why are they all naked?" Penny asked, louder than necessary. Several heads turned. I smiled. Back then, artists believed the human body showed the beauty of God's creation. But before I could say more, Laurel's voice cut in sharply. "Edith, that's enough. They're 8 and 10. They don't need to hear about nudity." "I was just explaining the art," I said. "We have our own way of raising our kids." Hayden stepped in quickly. Let's not argue. Mom, just respect Laurel's boundaries. I went quiet. The guide ushered the children toward another wall, gently redirecting them. That evening after dinner, I knocked on Hayden and Laurel's door. Hayden was with the kids at the rooftop pool. Laurel opened the door. Can I talk to you? I asked. She stepped aside. I wanted to say, I'm sorry for earlier. I didn't mean to overstep. She sat on the bed and gestured toward the chair. Let's be honest, Edith. We brought you on this trip because Hayden felt guilty. You've always said you dreamed of Europe. This is your chance to see it. I'm grateful, I said. But you need to understand your place. She went on. Hayden and I are the parents. You're the grandmother. We make the rules. I understand, I said. Then don't undermine us again. I nodded and left. As I walked down the hall, I heard her voice through the door. I told her. I hope she gets it now. From Rome, we moved on to Florence, then Venice. The cities were beautiful, but I saw less and less of them. I stayed behind with the children more often while Hayden and Laurel went to museums or dinners on their own. In Venice, I tried once more. Hayden and I stood alone in Piazza San Marco while Laurel took the kids to feed pigeons. Do you remember Washington? I asked. You were 12. Your father and I took you to the Smithsonian. Yeah, he said, not looking up from his phone. That was a good trip. You said you wanted to be president one day. He laughed softly. Childhood dreams. You were such a thoughtful boy. His smile faded. If this is about how we treat you? No, I said quickly. I just remembered. He patted my shoulder, then pointed. Laurel's waving. Let's go. That night in Paris, it rained from the moment we arrived. The hotel was old, with steep stairs and no elevator. I dragged my suitcase up slowly. My room was small under the eaves, with a sloped ceiling and a single window. I unpacked, lay down, and closed my eyes. Then a knock at the door. Grandma Penny said, Are you coming? We're going to the museum. I stood up sore but smiling. Give me 10 minutes. At the Louvre, things followed the same pattern. After an hour, the kids grew tired. Laurel turned to me again. Take them to the cafe. We want to see the Impressionist collection. That's at the Orsay, Hayden said quietly. What's the difference? She snapped. I took Bryce and Penny, found a table in the museum cafe, and shared a sandwich between them. Then we went in search of the Mona Lisa. Penny frowned. She's smaller than I thought. She has a secret smile, I told her. I don't see it, she said honestly. We wandered past Greek statues and ancient Egyptian relics. I told them stories as we walked. When we met Hayden and Laurel at the exit, Bryce spoke up first. Dad, we saw a mummy and a real sarcophagus. And Venus, Penny added. Grandma said no one knows where her arms went. Hayden looked surprised. You saw all that? They were curious, I said. Laurel didn't reply. Her expression tightened. That night, Hayden and Laurel went out to dinner again. The kids and I stayed in. We ordered food to the room, spread a blanket on the floor, and had a picnic. I told them stories about Harry, about how he loved fishing, and always made the best pancakes. Why doesn't Mommy like you? Grandma Penny asked. I paused. That's a complicated question. She says you're weird. She says Daddy used to be different. Well, I said quietly, people change. Later, when the children were asleep, I ran a bath. The old tub was deep, the water warm. I closed my eyes and let myself drift. Then I heard voices, faint, coming through the vent. I don't know why you brought her, Laurel was saying. She ruins everything. She's my mother, Hayden replied. She's manipulating the kids, filling their heads with stories, trying to make you look bad. There was a long silence. Sometimes Hayden said, I think we should look into a nursing home. My hand slipped under the water. I didn't move. I listened to every word. "She's a burden," Laurel said, "and she's only going to get worse." They kept talking, but I'd stopped hearing them. When the water cooled, I got out, wrapped myself in a towel, and sat on the bed. My hands were trembling. By morning, I had a ticket booked, a flight back to Phoenix City. I left before sunrise while the city was still asleep. I didn't leave a note explaining what I'd heard. Just one line at the front desk. "Tell them I went home." And as the cab pulled away, I looked out at the streets of Paris and thought, this isn't what I'll remember. Not the art, not the food, just the sound of my son planning where to send me when I became too much. The cab from the airport dropped me off just after midnight. The porch light at Vivian's house was still on, same as it had been since we were neighbors 40 years ago. I stood there for a moment with my suitcase, the air thick with humidity, the smell of cut grass and pavement soaked in heat. When I knocked, it only took her a few seconds to open the door. She was in an old robe with her hair tied back, and the look on her face didn't change. She just stepped aside and opened her arms. "Come in, Marlene," she said quietly. I stepped inside. Her living room was dim, the lamp by the piano casting a warm gold light across the hardwood floors. The same lace curtains from years ago hung in the front window. I set my suitcase down by the door and sat where I always used, a far end of the couch where the cushions were softest. Vivian didn't ask anything right away. She brought me a glass of water, wrapped a blanket over my lap, and sat down across from me. "I left Paris this morning," I said. "They don't know I'm gone." Vivian nodded, not in surprise, just understanding. "I heard them talking," I went on, "about putting me in a home." Her hands rested in her lap, fingers still listening the way old friends do without rushing. "I didn't say goodbye," I added. "Good," she said softly. "You don't owe them that." I stayed at her place for 2 nights. The first day, I didn't leave the guest room. Slept most of it, ate a little toast, just listened to the sounds of her house, the screen door creaking open when she got the mail, her dog Scout patting down the hallway, the kettle hissing when she made tea. On the second day, I sat out on the porch, my legs curled under a quilt. The sun was high, and the street felt the same as it had when our boys were young. I could still picture them racing on bikes down the block, yelling about who was faster. I didn't know what came next. I didn't want to go back to that house. Every room had been rearranged, every drawer filled with someone else's things. My name might still have been on the deed, but it hadn't felt like mine in years. Vivian came out with a folded newspaper and a mug of black coffee. "You need to talk to someone who knows what they're doing," she said. I called Myra Simmons. Remember her? "She's with Parker and Graves now. She's still practicing 3 days a week. She'll meet with you tomorrow if you're ready." I was. The next morning, we drove to Myra's office. She looked the same gray curls, same straight posture. She offered me a seat by the window and listened as I told her everything. The Europe trip, the comments I overheard, the years of being pushed aside. "Do you still hold title on the home?" she asked. "Yes. Any agreements in writing that give Hayden and Laurel tenancy? No." She tapped her pen lightly on the desk. "Then legally you can sell it, and you don't need their permission to do so." I didn't answer right away. She leaned forward. "Marlene, you're not just someone's mother or grandmother. You're the homeowner. You get to decide what happens next." We met again the following week. This time with a real estate agent, present kind, mid-50s, wore a rose gold wedding band and sensible heels. Her name was Karen, and she'd handled estate transitions before. I handed her photos of the house, some old, some more recent, and she made a note of the upgrades, the neighborhood, the school zoning. "I can have a valuation report to you by Friday," she said. Vivian drove me home after the meeting. Neither of us spoke much on the ride. At a stoplight, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "You did good today." That night, I sat on the back porch with Scout curled at my feet. I watched a plane blink across the sky, wondering if it was headed east. I didn't regret coming back, but the ache hadn't left either. I missed the way Penny tucked her feet under my legs when we watched movies. I missed Bryce's questions. I missed hearing them laugh down the hall. But I didn't miss being invisible. I didn't miss swallowing my words or apologizing for breathing. A week later, I signed the first round of papers. Myra sent an official letter to Hayden and Laurel informing them of my decision and giving them 30 days to vacate the property. The phone calls started that night. I didn't answer the first few. Let them ring out. On the fourth day, Hayden left a voicemail. "Mom, I don't understand. What's going on?" Karen said the house is listed. We're not ready to move. Can we please talk? I didn't return the call. Not yet. Vivian helped me tour a few rental properties. Nothing fancy, just quiet places where I could hear my own thoughts. We found a one-story off Lawson Avenue. 2 bedrooms, washer and dryer, inside a little fenced yard with marigolds someone had clearly cared for. The rent was reasonable, the neighbors waved when we drove by, and the kitchen had enough space for my rolling pin and the pie dish I'd had since '82. I signed the lease the next day. We moved a few things from storage and the rest I bought secondhand. A rocking chair, a bookshelf, a soft yellow rug for the den. I filled the cabinets with the things I liked to eat: split pea soup, saltines, raspberry jam. I hung a framed photo of Harry on the hallway wall, just before the bathroom, right where I'd see him every morning. The silence in the house didn't scare me. It felt clean, honest. On the first Sunday, I unpacked my good tablecloth and set out a roast and potatoes. Vivian came over after church. We ate in the kitchen, the windows open, a breeze rustling through the screen. After dessert, she poured us tea and said, "So what now?" "I don't know," I answered. "But it feels like the first time in a while I get to decide." She smiled. "Then let's see where it goes." I hadn't blocked Hayden's number. I just didn't pick up yet. I needed time. Time to figure out who I was when I wasn't waiting on someone else's schedule. The following week, I got a card in the mail. No return address. Inside, a single line written in Penny's handwriting. "Grandma, did you go home without us?" I traced her letters with my thumb and set the card on the mantel. Yes, I thought. Yes, I went home. It rained all through March. Not the soft kind that patters gently on the roof, but long, soaking sheets that turned the sidewalks to shallow streams and knocked the blossoms off every tree on my block. I didn't mind. I liked the hush it brought. I kept the windows cracked just enough to let in the sound. Most mornings, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of tea, sorting through old paperwork I hadn't looked at in years. Some of it still had Harry's handwriting in the margins. One gray Tuesday, I found an envelope I didn't recognize. It was wedged behind a stack of utility bills in a box labeled House Records. I opened it slowly. Inside were 4 documents. The first was a copy of our original mortgage from 1982. The second, a deed transfer from when we paid it off in full in 2007. The third, dated just 2 years ago, was the surprise. It was a notarized quitclaim deed. Hayden had filed it, listing both our names as joint tenants with right of survivorship. My signature was there. So was a notary stamp from some mobile signing service, but I didn't remember signing it. The 4th page was an email thread. Laurel's name was in the header. I read through it twice, then picked up the phone. "Vivian," I said, "can you come over 10 minutes later?" She was at my door, umbrella in hand. I showed her the documents. She read through them carefully, then looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "This is peculiar." "I never signed this," I said, not knowingly. "You think they forged it?" "I think they may have put papers in front of me during a holiday visit and told me it was something else." Maybe a refinancing request or insurance update? Laurel's always had a way of explaining things quickly and moving on before I ask questions. Vivian set the papers down and folded her hands. "Call Myra," she said, "right now." Myra took one look and requested a meeting at the courthouse the next morning. She brought in a specialist from a firm downtown, an older gentleman with steady hands and quiet eyes, who examined the documents under a lamp for nearly 20 minutes. "This signature," he said, pointing with a capped pen, "is similar to the one on the mortgage. But look here. The slope on the M is different. The tail on the E trails upward instead of downward. Whoever did this practiced it, but they didn't know how your signature evolved over the years. Can it be challenged?" "Absolutely." We filed a motion to reverse the quitclaim. Myra handled everything. 3 days later, Hayden called. "I don't understand," he said. "Why are you doing this?" "We were trying to make sure things were protected if something happened to you." "That's not what this is," I said. "Mom, don't let some lawyer scare you into—" "I'm not scared," I interrupted. "I'm aware." He was silent for a moment. "I never meant for you to feel cut out." "But you did," I said, "and now I'm taking it back." The line went quiet. Then he hung up. 2 weeks passed. I heard nothing from Hayden. No word from Laurel, no postcards from the kids. But the motion was accepted and the fraudulent deed nullified. The house was officially mine again, clean title, uncontested. Myra called the next day to ask how I wanted to proceed. "I want it sold," I said, "as soon as possible." Karen listed the property that Friday. By Sunday, she had 3 offers. I chose the couple with the handwritten letter. They had 2 small girls, wanted to be close to the school. Said they dreamed of building a treehouse in the backyard. I signed the final papers that Monday. The wire transfer hit my account by noon. I went for a long walk that evening, just as the rain began to lift. The air smelled like wet clay and pine. I passed by the old grocery store where Harry and I used to buy apples and cinnamon sticks in the fall. The windows had new decals, but the bell above the door still jingled the same. I didn't go inside, just kept walking. Later that night, I got a message. Not a call. A photo. Penny and Bryce standing in front of my old house. The for sale sign was gone. So were Hayden's car and Laurel's SUV. Just the children bundled in spring jackets holding hands on the sidewalk. Below the image, a short message. "We're not allowed to call, but we love you." I stared at it for a long time before saving it. The next morning, I opened a notebook and started writing down everything I wanted them to know. About their grandfather. About the cherry tree we planted when Hayden was born. About the way the kitchen filled with sun in the late afternoons. About the day I found Penny's name in a baby book, and how I cried because it was the same one I'd circled for Hayden's sister before we lost her. I didn't know when I'd see them again, but I knew this: they'd grow up and they'd ask questions, and when that day came, they'd have my words. I placed the notebook in a drawer beside my bed and rested my hand on top of it. Then I made a list, not of chores or errands, of every single thing I'd always wanted to do, but put off. Join a quilting circle. Learn to make sourdough bread from scratch. Take the bus up to Flagstaff in the fall. Visit that quiet lake in Oregon where Harry used to fish. And write to the children every month, whether Laurel let them read it or not. The new owners weren't due to move in until Monday. Karen said I could stop by if I needed to check the mailbox or make a last walkthrough. I hadn't planned to. But on Saturday morning, I found myself standing outside the gate again. It had been almost 4 months since I walked away from that house. The grass had grown longer near the fence, and a box of furniture sat curbside for donation. Laurel's hydrangeas were wilted, and the patio chairs had been stacked neatly beneath the awning. It didn't feel like mine anymore, but it didn't feel like theirs either. I stepped onto the porch and unlocked the front door one last time. The air inside was stale but familiar. Sunlight cut through the gaps in the drapes. The living room was empty now. No couch, no framed art, no toys scattered across the floor. The only sound was the soft creak of the wood beneath my shoes. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls like I was saying goodbye. The kitchen window still had the chip in the corner from where Harry's ladder slipped when he hung the bird feeder. The pantry shelves still held faint outlines where the spice rack used to sit. I opened the cabinet beneath the sink and found one of Penny's barrettes tucked behind a cleaning rag. Upstairs, the bedrooms were bare. Hayden's room, once painted navy with silver stars on the ceiling, had been repainted gray. I stood in the doorway and looked up. One star remained in the corner, faded, peeling. I moved to the main bedroom. The closet doors were open. Empty hangers knocked gently against each other. I stepped inside and turned around once. Then I closed the door. In the hallway, I paused outside the room that had once been my sewing nook. When Laurel turned it into my bedroom, she added blackout curtains and a folding bed with wheels. The closet had been filled with emergency supplies, extra diapers, bulk shampoo boxes of protein bars. There was no lock on the door. I opened the closet and pulled the string for the overhead light. I reached to the back and ran my hand along the paneling. Then I crouched, pulled up the corner board, and found what I had hidden there almost 20 years ago. A small fireproof box. Black. Rusted latch. I carried it to the kitchen table and opened it with the key I still kept on my keychain. Inside were the things no one knew I'd kept. A bundle of letters from Harry. The deed to the house with his original signature. A Polaroid of Hayden on his 3rd birthday frosting on his cheeks. A newspaper clipping from the day we bought the house. A tiny gold pin with my initials engraved on the back. And beneath all that, a sealed envelope addressed in my handwriting. To the next owner of this house, it read. I unfolded the note and reread what I'd written all those years ago, just in case. Just in case something ever happened. Just in case someone forgot. I took a pen from my purse and added a line at the bottom. Thank you for giving this house a fresh start. I hope it brings you laughter music and soft mornings full of peace. Treat it well. It held more than one woman's life. Then I resealed it, slipped it back into the box, and returned it to its place behind the panel. It was almost noon by the time I finished. I sat on the front steps with a paper cup of lemonade I'd brought from home. A red pickup passed by radio low. Somewhere a lawnmower buzzed. A woman walking her dog waved from across the street. I stood up and locked the door behind me. One key went into the envelope for Karen. The other, I kept. Not because I'd ever use it again. Just because I wanted to remember I once had the power to lock and unlock that door. That afternoon, I stopped by the post office and mailed a small package. Not to Hayden, not to Laurel, to Penny. Inside was a children's book about wildflowers. An old photo of her with a daisy crown, and a note that said simply, "If you ever want to grow something new, I'll be right here." I didn't include a return address, but I had a feeling she'd know who it was from. Later that night, I lit a candle in my new kitchen and sat down with a blank sheet of paper. At the top I wrote, "Places I've always wanted to see." The first entry, Sedona in October. Red rocks and open sky. Then I poured myself a cup of tea, opened the window, and let the cool air in. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of choosing for myself. The call came on a Wednesday, just after dinner. I was rinsing dishes when the phone rang landline, not the cell. That number was only shared with a few people. I dried my hands on a dish towel and answered. Marlene Bishop. Yes, this is Officer Merritt with the Oak Ridge Police Department. We have a report filed involving you and a disturbance earlier today at 309 Elm Street. I held the receiver steady. I haven't been near Elm Street in over a week. Well, the complainants say otherwise. They allege you entered the property without permission and removed personal items from the garage. I felt my jaw tighten. That house was legally sold. I returned the keys. The property belongs to the Willoughbys now. Understood, ma'am, but we still have to log the complaint. Just needed your statement for the file. I gave it. Calmly, factually. He thanked me and hung up. That evening I called Myra and told her what happened. She paused for a long beat before speaking. They're testing you, trying to scare you. You did everything by the book. I know. You want me to send a letter? Something formal. No, I said. Let them rattle their own cage for a while. 3 days later, a letter showed up in my mailbox. No return address, just a printed label with my name. I opened it carefully. Inside was a typed message. Short. 6 lines. We hope you're satisfied. The children are confused. Laurel's parents have stepped in to help with costs. Don't expect further contact. No signature. I folded the letter in half and slid it into the back of my recipe binder between the lemon bars and the banana bread. Then I called the bank. Hi, this is Marlene Bishop. I'd like to set up 2 new accounts, one for each of my grandchildren. The young man on the line was polite, walked me through every step. I created separate custodial funds, each tied to their names. Small to start, but I planned to add to them monthly, quietly, automatically. The next morning, I returned to the post office with 2 cards, one pink, one blue. No birthday, no holiday. Just a short message in each. There's something waiting for you when you're ready. I mailed them to the Willoughbys' address. No forwarding necessary. Later that week, I went with Vivian to the community center. They had a bulletin board near the door, covered with flyers, piano lessons, knitting groups, walking clubs. One caught my eye, local history lecture series, volunteers needed. I tore off a tab and called the number. A woman named Roseanne answered and invited me to coffee that Friday. We met at a diner just off Main Street, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and laminated menus. She asked about my background, how long I'd lived in town, what I remembered about the flood in '85, or the old train depot. I used to teach 8th grade civics, I said, before I stayed home with my son. She nodded. You're exactly the kind of voice we want. Familiar? Rooted. We set a schedule, twice a month talks at the library covering neighborhood history and oral traditions. My first session had 12 people. By the third, we had 22. Folks brought notebooks, questions, memories of their own. I started collecting them in a binder, organizing them by decade. One morning, as I was packing up, a woman approached. Tall, with graying curls and gentle eyes. Excuse me, she said. Were you the one who used to live on Elm Street? I was. She smiled. I live around the corner. My daughter plays with the Willoughby girls. One of them, Penny, I think, told my granddaughter her grandma used to read her stories about a man who built a treehouse. I nodded. That sounds right. She still talks about you, the woman said. Just thought you'd like to know. I thanked her and walked to my car, slowly, hands tucked in my pockets. That night, I pulled out a folder from my desk and reviewed the final step I'd been holding off on. I called Myra the next morning. I'd like to update my will, I said, and I want everything written plainly, no loopholes. We met the following week. She drafted the new version in a tone both clear and unshakable. In the event of my passing the estate, what remained of it would be placed in a trust. Equal distribution to Penny and Bryce upon their 25th birthdays. No access granted to their parents or any extended guardians. A local attorney would act as trustee. Any attempt to interfere would trigger a protective clause and reroute the funds to a local scholarship foundation. Myra looked at me across the desk. "Are you sure you want to make it this firm?" "Yes," I said. "They'll understand one day." We signed the documents and filed them with the clerk. I left the office with 2 certified copies and a lighter heart. Back at home, I made a pot of vegetable soup and opened the front door to let the breeze drift in. I sat with my notebook, updated the next 3 letters to the children, and marked the envelopes for May, June, and July. I didn't know if they'd ever reach them, but I wanted them to see the stamps, to know someone was thinking of them month after month, to understand someday maybe that love doesn't vanish just because someone decides you're no longer convenient. The Heritage Festival was held the second weekend of May, like always. Booths lined the courthouse square, local honey, hand-woven rugs, corn dogs on paper trays. The Historical Society had their own tent, tucked near the south entrance beneath a white banner that read, "Voices of Oak Ridge." I arrived early to help Roseanne set up. She handed me a stack of pamphlets and pointed toward the folding tables already filling with volunteers. A light breeze carried the scent of kettle corn. Behind us, a bluegrass trio was tuning up. By 10 o'clock, the sidewalks were full. I gave my first talk at 11:30, right after the mayor's speech. 20 minutes on the old mill, followed by questions about the original township boundary. People lingered afterward, asking about old road names tracing back great-grandparents on the plat map. I had just finished handing out the last flyer when someone stepped into the tent. "Hi, Mom." Hayden's voice had changed just enough that I almost didn't recognize it right away. He looked tired. Shirt untucked, dark circles beneath his eyes. There was a crumpled receipt in his hand and a phone tucked half out of his pocket. For a moment, neither of us moved. "I wasn't sure I'd find you here," he said. "This is where I usually am on Saturdays," I answered. He glanced toward the edge of the tent where Roseanne had stepped away to talk with a reporter. "Do you have a minute?" I nodded and followed him to the bench near the fountain. We sat in silence for a while. He tapped his knee, then stopped. Finally, he spoke. "Laurel lost her job last month. They let her go after a review. She hasn't told her parents yet." I listened. "We're behind on the mortgage," he went on. "The girls need new shoes as Bryce has outgrown his bike. Laurel's mom covered the last tuition check for Penny's program." He looked at me then. "I know things didn't end well, but I was hoping maybe you could help, just for a little while." "We're trying." I let the words sit. Then I opened my purse and handed him an envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "Monthly deposits," I said. "One for each child. I set them up the week after the sale. They'll be there when the time comes." He opened the envelope, scanned the printout, and blinked. "You've been doing this." "I have." He looked away toward the row of food trucks across the street. His voice dropped lower. "Why didn't you tell us? You weren't asking." "Then," I said, "you were informing." He nodded. "Laurel's father said we should have handled things differently." I folded my hands in my lap. "I'm not angry anymore," I said, "but I'm not stepping back into something that's already closed." He looked at the envelope again. "They miss you, you know. The kids." "I miss them too." He exhaled slowly. "Would you come to Penny's piano recital next month?" "It's at the school gym, Tuesday evening." "I'd like to," I said. We sat a little longer. A couple walked past with funnel cake. A boy tugged at his mother's hand, pointing to the face painting station. Then Hayden stood. "I should get back. Laurel's waiting in the car." I stood too. "Drive safe." He hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged me. It wasn't tight, but it wasn't brief either. Then he stepped away and walked down the sidewalk. I watched until he turned the corner and disappeared behind the kettle corn stand. That night, I returned home and added a new note to Penny's folder. Recital on June 10th. Bring flowers. She likes the orange ones. I placed it in the pile with the others and closed the drawer. Not everything had been healed, but something had shifted, and that was enough for now. The gym smelled faintly of waxed floors and brass polish. Folding chairs lined the basketball court with a small riser at one end where the students waited hands folded in their laps. I spotted Penny right away third from the left in a navy blue dress hair tucked behind one ear. She looked taller than I remembered. Her legs swung nervously under the bench. I sat in the second row off to the side. Not close enough to be noticed right away, but not hidden either. Hayden nodded to me when he walked in with Laurel. She didn't look over. The program was printed on pink paper folded in half. Penny was number 6. I listened as the first few students played their pieces simple melodies, some halting, others rushed. The audience clapped kindly after each. When they called her name, she stood with both hands pressed flat against her skirt, then walked to the piano without looking at the crowd. She adjusted the bench and placed her fingers gently on the keys. She played Clair de Lune, not the full piece, just the familiar part in the middle, soft and slow like water. Her foot pressed the pedal just right, holding the notes until they blurred slightly like moonlight on glass. Halfway through, she glanced up. Just once. Our eyes met for less than a second, but it was enough. Afterward, she returned to her seat, and I watched her tuck her hands under her thighs like she used to when she was small and unsure of herself. The recital ended with a group photo and punch in the hallway. I waited near the vending machines, a bouquet of orange gerbera daisies wrapped in brown paper resting in my lap. Penny came toward me slowly alone. She stopped a few feet away. "You came," she said. "I wouldn't miss it." She looked at the flowers. "Those are my favorite. I remember." She took them gently, pressing the stems against her chest. "Mom said you've been writing." "I have." She looked down, then back up. "Can I write back?" "Yes," I said. "You can." She nodded and turned to rejoin her classmates, but looked over her shoulder before disappearing into the crowd. Outside, the sun was low, the light stretching long across the parking lot. I sat in the car a few minutes before driving home. That night, I added one more letter to the stack. This one was different. No envelope, just a folded page tucked into the front of the folder. "I saw you today. You played beautifully. I'm proud of the person you're becoming." I didn't sign it. Some things don't need a name. In the quiet afterward, I poured a cup of tea and stood by the window, watching the wind stir the porch fern. I thought about how much I'd lost, but also what I'd kept: integrity, peace, the memory of a granddaughter's quiet smile. Sometimes justice doesn't look like a courtroom or a headline. Sometimes it's a slow return, a glance, a letter, the right name on a bank account. A promise kept even when no one is watching. And sometimes that's enough. Thank you for listening all the way through. If any part of this story stayed with you, I'd love to know. Feel free to share your thoughts below, and if you'd like to hear more stories like this, you're welcome to subscribe.